Welcome to Podcrushed. I have a question just to kick us off. Why not? Are you resting or making me money?
Wait, someone else said
Are you resting,
that?
Nava? Or are you making me money? Or Sophie, how about you?
I've never heard this question, but I've also never rested.
Suspicious. Although I can confirm, never rested. Nava's never rested.
Never rested.
It's been my birthday recently. It's the best time of year.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Which also means that it's Sophie and David's little baby's birthday the day after, November 2nd. It also commemorates the morning I woke up to this text from Nava. Are you resting or are you making me money, Penn? This is probably
Wait, what was the rest of it? What was the rest of the message?
Well, then you quipped back. Nava's the momager of this family, to which I said, this isn't a family.
Mm-hmm.
Nope.
Oh.
Yeah, always offensive when you feel the need to point out we're not blood, technically.
And then I said, P.S. It's my B-day. Nava, did you know that it was my birthday?
No, I honestly did not know. That information is publicly available on Google, but I did not know.
So you don't have a Google alert, you're saying?
No, I
But
do
Penn
not.
Badgley's the most famous Scorpio.
Am I? No.
Yeah,
sure.
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, guy, sure. So then Nava says, never mind, or nivama, just in text speak. You're doing great, sweetie, which I love. Sophie then said, P.S. I'm in labor. That was
The most casual PS.
Chill. I'm just like such a chill girl in labor.
You're so chill, Sophie. Yeah.
I would have quipped about it in the days leading up that like maybe you would be like resting on your belly, like you're
Yeah. The phone was on her belly and the belly's like, the phone is like bouncing.
Well, actually, it was like the more chill side of labor, but I knew just from the way the group chat was popping off and pinging that I wanted to, announce my departure.
And then how did you respond, Penn?
Oh, I just did that I did that thing in comedy where I brought it back to the beginning. I said, you're doing great, sweetie. Put the phone down, though. Put the phone down, though, with a question mark. See?
Never.
This was a great moment in the group chat. I would venture to say perhaps my favorite moment in the group chat, primarily because Penn was participating, which is a rare honor in and of itself.
Yeah, we finally have proof that Penn does read the group chat. And actually, not only does he read it, he goes back to read it. Yeah.
I take a scroll
scrolls a
every
year
now and
back.
then. I do. Yeah. It's just like this for 37 minutes, just scrolling, trying to find it.
No, this is a great moment from our group chat. And it turns out that US Cellular is actually doing a really cool campaign right now where they are turning your group chat moments into wrapping paper for the holiday season. So with your permission, I will be submitting this as our moment.
I don't know that I want this moment memorialized because I don't look so great, but I do think the idea of getting a gift wrapped in a memory is so meta. I love that.
So between now and November 24th, you can DM US Cellular on Instagram with a screenshot of your favorite group chat moment of the year, of the whole year. And they might, if you're lucky, they might send you a free group chat wrap. So you can literally give the gift of connection to your loved ones wrapped in a memory.
Speaking of loved ones.
Yes, today we are joined by the lovely Eddie Redmayne. If you don't know, he's the award-winning actor. He's got Tonys, Oliviers, I think BAFTAs, Oscars. He's been everywhere, and he's only 42. Really an incredible talent. You probably know him from his portrayal as Stephen Hawking.
A fun little piece of trivia is that he was the first man in his 80s to win an Oscar. So he holds that record.
The first man from the 80s.
To play?
Oh,
The first man from the 80s.
like,
Now, but that's a
he's 42.
huge point of clarification. Yes.
What?
And he won that
the
Oscar
first man
for
born.
Were you in the interview?
he won that Oscar, of course, for playing Stephen Hawking in The Theory of Everything. He's also been in the Fantastic Beasts films, The Trial of Chicago 7. He's been on Broadway, on the West End. Most recently, he's got a miniseries called The Day of the Jackal, out now on Peacock. It's about a ruthless British assassin. He's a ruthless British assassin. He's a British assassin. The classic character, the Jackal, now made fresh and modern in 2024, 2025. We were honored to have Eddie here today. You're going to love this one. Don't go anywhere. Welcome to Podcrushed. We're your hosts. I'm Penn.
I'm Nava.
And I'm Sophie. And I think we would have been your middle school besties.
Writing letters of love upon a parchment paper, scratching with an ink quill. No,
Yes.
this isn't resonating?
Scratching. That's perfect.
Eddie, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. Where are you guys?
Nava's in LA, and I happen to be in Florence.
In Florence.
Yeah, I'm
the
visiting my
levels
parents.
of jealousy.
I
Christ.
know, I know.
Whereabouts in
I know,
Florence
I
are you?
lucked out. Right on the Arno.
Oh,
My parents live here. Yeah, it's nice. It's not a bad place to visit.
that's beautiful. I'm very jealous. I got engaged in Florence.
Really?
Oh,
wow.
sweet.
So we do usually start at like just about 12.
Yeah.
So we want to go there, but if our research serves us, did you
Terrified of
start?
research.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Did you start? Did you go to Jackie Palmer Stage School
Oh my
at
God.
age
We're
at
going
age 10?
back. We're
Is
going
that
straight
right?
in. We're
Yeah,
going straight
yeah,
in.
we are. Welcome.
Welcome. Wow. Good morning. Yeah, I did. So I grew up in a family who were very sporty, and that was kind of, I suppose, the language in my elder brother, my younger brother, my half brother and half sister, my dad, everyone. There was brilliant sporting capability, and I kind of lacked a certain amount of that. And
Was it very clear very early
it was
on?
pretty clear pretty early on that anything that my brother, particularly my elder brother, because we were quite close in age, anything he was brilliantly accomplished at, I was not. And so I don't know whether it was an active thing, but I was always doing the opposite. So sort of from an early age, like music and through music, really, theatre became something that I was sort of passionate about. And I always was amazing looking back on it, particularly as a parent now, is that despite my parents not really having any knowledge of that world, they were sensationally sportive.
That's what it sounds
Yeah.
like. I mean, honestly, just what we learned. Wikipedia gives you something.
Yeah.
It does give you something. It really does seem like. I mean, I'm glad what you're saying supports what we were. Like, it really feels like you came out of nowhere a little bit in your family. I mean, I don't want to suggest a black sheep or something like that,
Yeah.
but it's cool, you know. I mean, they're the rest of the family being so oriented in these other ways.
Yeah.
You know, like I think also very business oriented, just
Yeah.
in terms of the careers that were
Exactly.
pursued, right?
But I think there was something weirdly, the first sort of manifestation of something different was I sat at a piano when I was little, and I was at a friend's house, and my mum came round afterwards, and the friend's parents were like, you should get Eddie a piano because he really enjoys it. And she was like, I didn't even know he did. And I had this weird thing, which I can kind of remember from when I was about 6 or 7 years old, that I could sit at a piano and my fingers would I could sort of improvise something.
Wow.
And it felt incredibly freeing. And so my mum rented a piano and I started having lessons. And as I started to learn the piano properly, like technically, kind of all of that freedom or sort of facility disappeared, and I sort of learnt the piano in the very kind of formal way, and I wasn't particularly good, but I can
And
remember.
did it become less inspiring? I guess.
Yeah,
or
I think
just
so.
in-
But I remember early on, like age sort of 9 or 10, being in a concert at this school. They sort of everyone was playing their pieces, and I was just sort of put in front of the piano to play, and I remember having no fear, and I remember being able to sort of
Do you mean just to improvise?
to kind of improvise.
At 9 or 10 years
Now,
old.
Wow.
Looking back on it, I mean, I fucking hate improvising.
Right.
I'm a control freak. I don't know. There are all these sort of elements. But I look back on that time as this kind of, I do have a glint of the memory of it, as of what that freedom was. And I always think now with work and the older, and many things in life, actually, that mixture between kind of the control and the discipline of things you do versus the kind of that instinctive freedom that we all have in us is like how those two things marry is kind of intriguing.
I'm with you. I'm totally with you. So
I've managed to avoid the Jackie Palmer children's
Yeah.
agency
Well, yeah.
by talking about some.
Well, you know what I was thinking that it was
Instinct,
that you just went to performing arts school. Is that not what that is?
It's not. So no. So I was at a normal school and I loved music, singing particularly, and I love theatre, and one day I was on holiday and I met this lady and I was talking to her and she said, "Oh, my little brother is at this school in High Wycombe, which is just outside London." And
So it's like a class.
it's a class, and it is
Okay.
actually a school, but I just went at weekends
I see,
sporadically,
yeah.
and they had an agency there, and so I sort of signed up with a headshot and.
Oh, that's right. And you did end up modeling later. Is that what?
you
We don't need to go into that. I don't need to go into that.
Very unsuccessfully. But no,
Such
what was
a good
amazing is
reaction.
at this class, you would go once a year and do this kind of showcase at this theatre.
Okay.
And James Corden was there. I mean, even at that age, he was a couple of years older than me, but he was so charismatic, and he was an amazing dancer and a sort of huge, sort of passionate theatre kid. And yes, so I started auditioning for like real sort of musicals and things, and
Just about at 10, 11?
Yeah, 10, 11. Yeah,
That's cool.
Yeah.
You know, I moved to LA when I was 12.
Yeah.
And I started working. So for me, and by the way, they are former middle school administrators / teachers. So the joke is that they're teachers and I dropped out of middle school.
It's not a joke.
Yeah, it's not a joke. It's not funny. It's mostly true.
Stay in school.
Yeah. But I know that for me, like I can remember standing in the arrivals, like pickup taxi line at LAX at 12 years old at like 9 p.m. listening to Drew Hill on my Walkman, and just, you know, my life before and after was different. And you know, in as much as I've been able to pursue a career as an artist, I guess I'm curious, when did acting specifically become like, wow, this is feeding me in a way? You know?
I don't think, not for a while, honestly. I think it was music, and weirdly it was sort of movement. And I am a like really shoddy dancer, but I remember at that period feeling very free physically. And
That's
like
cool.
the elder I got, the more self-conscious and restricted and sort of restrained I felt physically. But I'm just quickly curious about that moment in LA, because you hear of American actors arriving in LA often young. Like, so what does that mean? Does that mean that you had a career where you grew up and there was a moment where you said to your parents, like, I'm moving to LA? Or what does it mean to get off a plane? It
I know
sounds
that,
so
right? Doesn't that sound crazy?
insane to me.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I
terrifying.
was with my mom,
It was with your mum.
and that was for pilot season. You know, you've heard of
yeah,
that
yeah,
probably.
Yeah, all the Brit actors, we all come out for pilot season in
Right,
order to
right,
escape
right.
the rain.
Right. So it really meant that I had an agent and manager in Seattle, Washington. Had been doing plays since I was about 9. Musicals. For me, actually, music was the intro into it. I loved music, knew nothing of acting. Through that, got into musical theater. Then got into theater, and then got into, you know, the suggestion of movies, TV, commercials. I tested on like I remember. Do you recall the film with Miko Hughes, a young child actor, and Bruce Willis called Mercury Rising?
I have not seen that movie.
Okay, it's fine. It was a role that I tested for and got very close to as like a 9-year-old.
Yeah.
And
oh my
it's-
God, do
and
you
it's-
remember that feeling though?
Oh,
when
yeah.
you were that little.
My reference was, of all things, Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man. So like at 9 years old, I recall that, like watching that and wanting to emulate that and feeling really good about it, trying to embody that, all those tics and stuff, which, yeah, so that's something that we also have in common. You have done, I'm thinking of the incredible embodiments of physicality and tics that you've done, you know, in certain roles. I guess, like, what was your perspective on art and the theater then? Did it seem illustrious and majestic and like far off?
It felt romantic, is what it was. 'Cause by that point, I was going to the theatre in London sporadically. My parents would take me, and at about the age of 12, through this agent, through the Jackie Palmer Children's Agency, I got a part in a production of Oliver. But I mean, hearing about your test, I remember that feeling when I first had an agent. You know, a week later, I got an audition for Annie Get Your Gun, and it was in the West End, and I was like, "This is it. This is where it all starts." I remember learning the song and going and queuing, there being this queue outside the theatre, this line that went round the block, and lots of kids from theatre schools all wearing their matching sort of sweaters, and you went on stage, and it was like an episode of American Idol. You sort of all had your number, and I prepared the whole song, a whole kind of number, and after singing one line of that song.
They just
it was
said,
kind of,
"Oh,
and I remember it was such an extreme memory, and now I sort of can't of rejection, and I sort of can't believe that the strength in some ways of my parents allowing me to. I was like, no, but I want to keep trying. I want to keep trying. But the Oliver was something I got, and I was just one of 60 kids in the cast. But I remember that feeling of being at high school and in the middle of class, age 12, getting up and walking across the bridge over the Thames and getting on the subway, the tube from Hammersmith Broadway to Oxford Circus, right into the kind of epicenter of London, and going to the London Palladium, which is this incredible old theatre, and Jonathan Pryce was playing Fagin, and I was one of many kids, but you would walk through the back alleys of the theatre and down past these reels of costumes and these gigantic sets and that without the, well, it is a cliche, but the smell of the makeup and the camaraderie and the eccentricity and uniqueness of theatre people was so seductive.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that I got to do that. And I got paid 20 quid a performance, and which my parents would then sort of invited all their friends to come and see it, and the tickets cost sort of 60 quid. So there was a massive loss-making experience for everyone. But it was no, that was the intoxication. That was the moment.
You mentioned your brother, him being into sport, kind of, and because he was close in age, made you kind of veer in the other direction. But I'm curious about your relationship in general.
Yeah, well, I'm really close to my family, and so my elder brother is 2.5 years older than me. And then my brother Charlie is sort of decade or so older than that, and who is he's my half brother, and my half sister Eugenie, who's a bit older than that, and then my little brother Tom is 6 years younger. So I really grew up in those sort of formative years. Tom was little, and James, my brother, who's 2.5 years older, was very present, and he was and is very talented, brilliantly driven, but he's a force of nature, and we have very sort of differing personalities, and I never. It's interesting because I love sport and I still do, but it was just he was so good at it that anything that he did, I don't know whether it was subconsciously I chose to do the opposite. So even within sport in England, in the summer you basically play cricket, or a few people play tennis. And so he would play cricket, I would play tennis. He would play football, I would play rugby. And I think it was just not wanting comparison, really. But even then, even in the world of sport, I remember being aware of I was quite self-aware in what I was good at and what I was bad at, and I suppose at being able to manipulate the things that I was not so good at and use those things that I was better at to aid that. So in sport, I could act the part, like I could, I could say the right things and sort of put on the right tone of voice to make it look like I knew what I was talking about, but it never felt sort of instinctive to me.
Eddie, I've heard you talk about how competitive your family is, and I think in particular you've said your mom, and I'm curious if you have a memory of like a moment where you realized it might be more than usual, like it might be over the top, the degree of competitiveness in the family.
That's a really good question. It was really a work ethic. My mum has an extraordinary work ethic and drive, and she instilled that in all of us from an early age. And I went to boarding school when I was 13, but sort of by that time, I had a sort of level of discipline, and I think I probably retained that level of discipline. I don't think it's always necessarily a good thing, and these things are things you now question now that I'm a parent. Like, I'm trying to think of. Well, there was one. I'm trying to think of a specific moment when she was competitive. She was also incredibly caring. And I remember there was this one time when I was playing a rugby match, and I was pretty skinny, but I was playing for...
You
this,
were, as opposed to now.
Sadly, I never had my bulk up phase, despite my best efforts. I was playing a game of rugby, and my mum would come to watch, and we were playing this school, and within about the first minute, that this sort of crash move came when this guy ran towards me. And when you're a teenager, I definitely looked like I was sort of 14 years old, and this guy looked like he was 25, and he was 6 foot. He was called Dougie, and he sort of lifted me over his shoulder, threw me on the ground, and then sort of fell on me with his elbow on my ribs and sort of broke my ribs. I'll just never forget the image of my mum on the sidelines having to be sort of restrained from sort of coming on, and her level of protection, and but yeah, that was after that was the sort of last game of rugby I think that she could sort of bear.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
So it's called Podcrushed, this podcast. We do like to ask about, first crushes, first heartbreaks that are so characteristic of this time, that can be so massive at the time. You look back and cringe and just think like, what was I thinking or what was I doing? But you were in boarding school, which also challenges that. I mean, so I'm curious, do you have a memorable story?
I mean, where to start with boarding school? Right? Because I went to boarding school at 13, but the school that I went to is this school, Eton, that is, one of
heard of it.
One of the most. It's an extraordinary place.
Yeah.
It's and of course, when you're that little, you don't understand that, and you don't. And you normalise so much. So, for example, at Eton, you wear a black tailcoat. You wear a starched collar every day.
Wow.
And you wear this sort of strange little starched piece of fabric that goes in, and as you say, every day. And you're in the middle, and it's a town, really. Very, very beautiful town. It sort of perhaps feels more like a university. And there are tourist buses that go past every day, and they're kind of looking at you dressed as penguins, and yet you've completely normalised the fact that you're dressed as a penguin because everyone else is dressed as a penguin. And it doesn't feel weird because when you're young, you don't. Well, I didn't question any of that, but it is a school that is embedded in history. It was founded by Henry VI, who also founded King's College, Cambridge, and it had the most staggering facilities kind of imaginable, and it's you pay a lot of money to go there. They now have brilliant scholarships, and you can get grants to go, and now their outreach is substantially more than it was in my day. But my God, is it a privileged place to go? But again, you're perhaps not conscious of it. But there's another thing that happens with school when you're that age is, I think, and it was an all-boys school as well, that the self-consciousness begins to kick in around that age, and the notion of caring too much or being passionate about something kind of is deemed uncool,
of course,
and that was, I felt like I was and remain a deeply uncool human being, and so I was pretty passionate about many things then, and so could exploit the facilities, which a dumbfounding art department, incredible theatres.
So you remained passionate.
I did.
I mean, clearly
I did, and I think I was
how?
mocked for it in the crushedness of the Podcrushed. There was definitely a level of like, this guy is. God, he's so eager. He's so, but again, perhaps and because I'd done by this point theatre and and professionally, and I'd earned money, I was kind of like, I don't give a fuck. This is what my, but the one of the sadnesses I've witnessed of that school, which is if you do go there and your parents have paid all this money and yet you are busy playing the kind of, I don't want to engage. It's just such an extraordinary waste because it has dumbfounding things. Back to the crush rather than the crushedness. There was this thing called the slab, which was this area in each of the boarding houses. So the school was divided up into boarding houses and had 10 boys in each year in the house. And the slab was this communal area as you entered a house, and it was where there were pockets for notes that might get sent around the school, and it was where people would linger, and there was the phone booth. And so my sort of first relationships were letters. I remember I'd kissed a girl at this party, and she was at a boarding school as well. And so,
How did you even have? I'm just
I
like
mean,
you don't have
these-
to paint
so
too much of a
parties
picture.
in London in which sort of everyone would gather. They
Okay.
were sort of events that were sort of organised.
For the schools.
Yeah.
kind
I
of?
actually don't know whether it was.
Okay,
It wasn't
I was just
specifically
sort
for
of,
the school.
you know.
But I remember that you'd start writing letters. I remember age 13, because you're in a boarding house. A friend came in and he saw me sort of writing my first letter. And as I was writing, "I love you" to this person, my mate was like, "Dude, you kissed her once." "Sure, you love her." I was like, "No, isn't that what you say?" Anyway, so this, fortunately, he guided me to probably not commit undying love to someone after having kissed them once. And I sent many letters to this person over a term. We saw each other, and we'd speak we would have these phone calls on the slab. That you'd do phone calls on a Saturday night, and you would wait, and there'd be this line of people. All the older boys would do the calls first, and you'd go into this little to the phone booth, and it would stink of kind of like adolescent male BO, and then you would do your call to this person who would then have it to their school, and they would go. You'd wait 10 minutes while they were summoned from watching Baywatch or something, and come back and have your sort of 3-minute conversation before you'd get pulled out by someone else. Anyway, so that was my functional relationship. It was letters and sort of 3-minute conversations.
That's so romantic.
Yeah, and then she
know,
dumped me
Yeah. It is
afterwards
so
because she said,
romantic.
sent me a letter being like, "Eddie, I suppose we haven't seen each other, so I'm not sure that's a relation." I was like, "Yeah, good point." Well made. So it wasn't that crushing.
You're right.
but,
Okay.
so that's not
Yeah,
quite
yeah,
what
no,
you
no.
wanted.
I mean, I love just the image. That could have happened 100 years ago. I feel like
Yeah.
the
Totally.
way that it was happening,
Yeah.
especially in your penguin suit.
In my penguin suit,
Yeah.
and but I miss letters.
So while I was struggling to come up with gift ideas for my husband, I was wondering, why do women's skincare products always seem to be so much better than men's? It's honestly quite frustrating, but that's where Jack Black comes in. I've just ordered David a set so that there's no more stealing my lotion, my creams. He is going to get his own stuff. This episode is sponsored by Jack Black. Jack Black offers a complete line of men's grooming products, from face cleansers to moisturizers to beard care. Whether your guy is a grooming aficionado or just starting out, Jack Black has got you covered. And just in time for the holidays, Jack Black has put together some amazing gifting sets. They've got everything you need to help your man stay polished through the hustle and bustle of the season. When I saw the gift sets, I knew that I had to snag something for David. I've got him a turbo wash, which is a combined body wash and hair wash for those mornings when he's running a little late and he says to me at the very last second, "Oh, I'm just going to take a rinse. I'm just going to get in the shower," right as we're supposed to be leaving. That does really happen, and so I'm excited for us to get this product and for David to not have any more excuses. According to Circana, Jack Black is now the #1 men's body care brand by total dollar sales. This holiday season, if you want simple, effective products that your significant other will love, you need Jack Black. Head to getjackblack.com/podcrushed and use code podcrushed for 10% off your order. Once again, that's getjackblack.com/podcrushed for 10% off. And make sure you use our promo code podcrushed so they know we sent you.
Learning a new language has actually always been on my bucket list, but between work, life, and work and life, and work and life and everything else, it felt impossible to find the time. And then I have been discovering Rosetta Stone, and it has completely changed the game for me. With Rosetta Stone, learning feels intuitive. Instead of just drilling vocabulary, I'm picking up the flow of conversations and starting to sound more like a native speaker. And the best part, the app is super easy to fit into my routine. So whether I'm sipping some tea in the morning or, on the train, walking my dog, I can sneak in just a quick little lesson wherever I am. The speech recognition technology is amazing. It's like having a personal coach fine-tune my pronunciation in real time. I'm noticing a pretty big difference. Honestly, it's been a lot more fun than I expected. Don't put off learning that language. There's no better time than right now to get started. For a very limited time, Podcrushed listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off. Visit rosettastone.com/podcrushed. That's 50% off, unlimited access to 25 language courses for the rest of your life. Redeem your 50% off at rosettastone.com/podcrushed today.
I have a question. It does take us fast forwards a little bit, but as I understand it, you had been friends and known your wife, Hannah, now for 12 years before you ever started dating. Is that right?
That is true, yeah.
Okay. And I think that's remarkable. And I was wondering, maybe more people should be looking within their friend group for their life partner. And I wondered how you made that leap from friends for so long to partners.
So I met Hannah probably when I was about 15 at a party. And without being, it really was one of those moments when I saw clocked eyes with someone across the room, and I was, and we chatted, and she's incredibly funny, Hannah, and deeply charismatic. And I was like, this is amazing. This is it. And she sat on my knee and asked me to introduce her to this guy across the room. And I was like, fuck you. Anyway, so that's where the friendship started. And then for years, that's when the 12, 15 years was we were kind of part of the same friend group, but we were never close friends. We always had this kind of chemistry, for one of a better word, that whenever we saw each other, there was something alive, and we would be at parties, but we were always in relationships. So it wasn't a close friendship. It was one that it was
waiting to unfold.
It was but then many years later, it was known within our group of friends that this chemistry existed, and was it ever going to be acted on? And literally, when I was 30, I think, or 29, I was at a friend's wedding, and Hannah's always late, and she was meant to be one of the kind of bridesmaids, almost one. And I was at this wedding in this church, and 10 minutes into the wedding, there's the door slammed open. My mate nudged me, and Hannah came running in late to the wedding, and so and that night we got together, and I thought it was. And I texted her a couple of days later, and all our friends were like, at last, why did it take 15 years? And I texted her the next day. No, I left it 2 days. I'd learned from my years, my early, don't say I love you in the
2 days, and then you said, I love you.
I love you, and it's always been
text her. And then she didn't respond. And I was like, see, I knew it. It's like this fickle quality. And anyway, year went by.
Wow, a whole year.
A year went by.
Because I wasn't gonna go back. I wasn't
fair.
glutton for punishment, And a year later, this friend of ours, Laura, was like, Eddie, why did you never get in touch with Hannah? And I was like, I did. And I texted her. She said, what number? I said, this number. And she said, that's not her number. And I know. No. So you
had the wrong number for 15 years.
This is like the
That was probably the case. But then it was while I remember it clearly, because I just rehearsed Les Miserables, the movie. And I had 4 days off before we started filming. And I was single. I booked to go to Florence. And to sort of drink double espresso and chain smoke and write poetry.
As 30? Oh, yeah, that's great.
All the above. And anyway, I texted Hannah on this right number, and I said, you don't want to go to the theatre, do you? And she sort of said, yeah, let's do that. And we went to the theatre, and that night went out for supper, and it was extraordinary, because it was the first time, it was someone that I'd known for 15 years, knew me for exactly who I was, rather than that sort of, well, I'm speaking of myself, but that version of a person you can put on when you're trying to start dating and trying to be the sort of best version of you. So there was no bullshit. She kind of could see straight through all of that. So and it was just, anyway, that evening went pretty wonderfully. And I said, drunk later, I was like, you don't want to go to Florence next week, do you? And she said, you don't mean that. And I said, well, I kind of do. And so the next day I sent my EasyJet booking form, which is, do you know what EasyJet is? It's like sort of JetBlue. It's really remote. And it's a sort of, no frills.
I think I used it once.
You once, exactly.
Yes, I'm pretty sure
I never went back.
it.
It's a no frills, very convenient airline. Anyway, she let me stew for a few hours, and then she sent her booking form, and even then I knew if this relationship was to have any legs, that we had to meet on the plane rather than at an airport. And I was right, because I got on the plane the next day and I was sitting next to these 3 nuns and a monk from Ireland. And the plane was absolutely rammed. And there was just one seat next to me free. And the captain was like, ladies and gentlemen, we're waiting for one person. And had arrived late and has remained late for the rest of our relationship. I kind of like our first proper date was where you are, Sophie, in Florence. Yeah.
So sweet.
Eddie, that's so
story.
incredible.
That's a long-winded. You didn't ask for that.
No,
Did you ask for
that's
that?
great.
Eddie, I wish we had you for 3 hours. You're such an amazing storyteller. We do want to transition to your career, and just to be
Why
mindful
bother?
of time.
Career schmear. This is much more to say.
It's amazing. Just to be mindful of time, I think let's start with Day of the Jackal. We got screeners, and what stood out to me is just I couldn't stop thinking about how much time you must have spent in the makeup chair, because you have so many disguises. So my question for you is, do you have a ritual? How do you stay sane doing hours and hours and hours of makeup?
How do I say sane is probably a more existential question. Oh, Firstly, it's first thing in the morning. You're right. Prosthetics take a long, long time, and you do have to go to and I don't know if you've done many.
Not at that level. I've done like the bruises and the
But
swelling.
even they
take a while.
They take a while.
Like an hour. But I mean, you reckon like 3 hours.
This was
probably,
3 or
right?
4 hours. But you kind of. I'd never done prosthetics at this level, and you zen out, and you then put in your earpods, and you listen to a podcast until they start doing your ears, and then your earpods get stuck. And but I find it actually a really good way into the day. The other thing about when you in Day of the Jackal, he's in the early scene, he's transforming into this kind of 75-year-old German
That opening scene, right?
chain smoker, and it. Seeing the layers of those things appear is actually kind of helpful for getting into character, because it's not just plonked on you. It kind of, you emerge from it. And the other thing that was lovely in the Day of the Jackal is, whereas in Moments in Theory of Everything, where I'd work with some prosthetics, you're playing the person. Here, the prosthetics is part of the Jackal's toolkit, and he's doing it himself.
Yeah,
so actually, whenever, I don't know how you are, but whenever I was sort of feeling insecure about any of these characters that I was playing as the Jackal, I had to keep reminding myself that the Jackal is an actor and he's doing the best that he can do, and that's kind of so. If
awesome.
you if there are any kind of faults there, blame it on the Jackal's lack of acting capability rather than your own.
Not Eddie's,
that's funny. Another thing we have in common, Eddie, is that we play baby-faced assassins. And
Baby-faced assassins.
Yeah.
Should we set up a club?
But one thing that I, sometimes I do struggle to believe the mortal stakes. When the stakes are mortal. Episode after episode after episode, we've done, in the end, 50 episodes,
Yeah.
So that's
a lot.
50 hours.
That's a lot of mortal stakes.
Of being like, there's a body in the trunk, there's a body up here, there's a body, but I love you.
Yeah.
But my thing is that if I ever don't believe it, well, you know what? This dude actually doesn't always believe it. He's lying.
Yeah.
So I understand that. There's a strange mental space when you're playing somebody who is a sociopath, actually.
I think that's the point. I mean, it was interesting. I did a film last year called The Good Nurse, playing a man called Charlie Cullen, who is a real, maybe the
real
biggest mass
serial killer,
murderer in this country, and trying to get into the psychology of that, and the kind of the cruelty of it, but the coldness of it, and also weirdly, clearly, the humanity that this guy had to his friends. He seemed like a normal. You have. The only way I can reconcile those two things, and it's the same with the Day of the Jackal, albeit a completely sort of fictional character, is that that there is a polarity to them. It's two different people, and yet those chinks when those two people reconcile with each other are the kind of intriguing moment.
You spend a lot of time silent in this. I would imagine. Is it the most silent role you've ever played? Of course, I've seen the early episodes. It may change.
I think it probably is, although strangely playing, Stephen Hawking for the latter part of his life when he was I Would Speak was a lot about.
That's true.
Although he would speak through his computer, there was a lot of silence. But I love that. I hate words.
I do too, man, dude.
Hate words.
It's so
Always with a script, I'm like, lose it. It's gonna ruin. Yeah, and I love those writers also who really. Because I don't know how you find it, there's this whole thing quite often with scripts where it's almost like there's the producer's version, which is the version written that tells the story overwritten, and then there's the version in which things are filleted out and have faith in actors to kind of communicate that stuff. But I really enjoyed that about this character. The kind of enigma of him was thrilling.
Yeah, I suspected that. I actually looked at the time code. The first time you speak is at 22 minutes into the first episode, which is a long time.
While.
And then you don't say much.
Aside from
is that the
practicing
English
the
bit?
German.
Yeah, that's the English bit. Where
Yeah.
sorry, you do like mutter German.
I mutter
in the
German.
beginning.
The way you're saying that, Ben, I mutter German. I can't tell you how fucking long it took me to sort that muttering.
It's good. I mean, look,
It was so strange. It was the strange, like acting in a language you don't speak a word of.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. Wow.
what's weird is you're playing this character who's German, but I had an amazing language coach, a woman called Simone, and she would teach me the German. But you would also have to go, look, the way I kind of want the character to say it is, if it was in English, it would be like, oh, these fucking people, I can't do that. And so you'd have to rely on her for the music of the phrasing almost of the words as well as the pronunciation of the words. It was an interesting exercise.
Well, what I love is that you kind of see that exercise in the opening scene. Again, this thing of playing a sociopath transparently, which is interesting. You see the jackal rehearsing, which I love. I can't remember the words, but it's a very jarring opening scene. There's an interesting musicality to it as you're like, and listening to, I suppose, what would have been a recording of that man's real voice.
Yeah. But it was, what was strange about it is I learnt the German in my voice, and which was sort of kind of sagt eine Wasser,
Sure, yeah.
but then suddenly when you've got this prosthetic on and he's this chain smoker, he's it was down in this weird place that looked completely odd until you had the prosthetic on. But the idea of performance, the jackal as an actor was one of the things that I found. It was that the whole show was an actor's playground in many ways.
I watched The Good Nurse soon after it came out, and I thought it was an incredible film. I actually went back and looked in my texts because I remember telling everyone I knew about it. Have you watched it? Have you seen The Good Nurse? Have you seen The Good Nurse? And I think I had texted 5 friends and 2 group chats.
Oh, wow.
Like, have you seen it? Let's talk about it. I thought it was incredible, and you played him so well. But I think depicting true crime is so tricky because there's like a balance that you have to strike without, like you described the polarity, trying to depict the polarity of a person, or at least using that in your preparation for the character. Everyone in the story is a real person, a whole person with lots of different facets to them. But you want to depict it in a way that doesn't glamorize the perpetrator, but also doesn't dishonor the victims. And it's a very fine line. And I think The Good Nurse really struck that balance. And I guess my question is 2 parts. First, how do you think the team and yourself were able to strike that balance? Like if you have any insight into how that happened? And then also what you think about the sort of rise now in true crime dramatizations.
Healthy.
As it's so intriguing to hear that because it was something that I wrestled with, thought a lot about for a couple of years. That the appeal of that script was twofold. It was the director Tobias Lindholm, who is this utterly brilliant Danish director who has made some brilliant Danish movies based on true events, but that have a quasi-documentarian quality to them, that are about displaying the events rather than insinuating or evoking kind of I don't know, an indulgence in the watching of it. I knew that it was in his hands. And secondly, the script by Christy Wilson Cairns, the piece is about Charlie Cullen, but it's actually about this extraordinary woman who was able to sort of reveal him and pull him in. But the main villain of the piece is actually the infrastructure. It's the hospitals that moved him on, this guy who they were conscious was killing people, and they moved him on because they didn't want to deal with the libel or the law cases. And the idea that how insidious that is, and I felt that there was dispassionate quality to the film in which those the villains of the piece were twofold, both Charlie but also the system, and I felt that it was delivered with that, with the observational quality of that, rather than something that was emotionally indulgent.
I think that's
Yeah,
actually
you
really
really feel
important
that.
in what we're calling true crime. You know, because what does feel sort of maybe unhelpful at a cultural level is how indulgent it can be. But then if we're telling stories about this depth of human nature that is more dispassionate, I think that's where it can be more useful and more insightful.
And also, weirdly, the thing that I found interesting about The Good Nurse is at the end, this character who has appeared kind of gentle and kind and has done these continuously horrific things, he's asked why he does it, and he says, because they didn't stop me. And so there's no kind of revelation. I think quite often in like human nature and true crime is looking for the catalyst, like what is it that makes someone behave like this, with the idea being that it's one moment of trauma or one key that alleviates and opens up people's behavior. But I think human beings are more complex than that, and certainly in The Good Nurse, I think there were people that watched it going, wait, I wanted to know why. I mean, it's obviously that is a real life story in which hundreds of people's lives were taken and families were affected, but the human need to know why is I think at the core of our intrigue with true crime.
Yeah. Wow. Eddie, sorry, we're just jumping around because
Please
you've done so many incredible
away.
things.
Jump
Let's
away.
go to Cabaret. There's so much we could ask about Cabaret, but one thing that stood out to me in doing research is that there was a bit of backlash when you were cast in the West End Cabaret, and you shared that it created a little bit of a crisis of confidence in you.
Yeah.
And you seem to be someone who prepares very rigorously for roles, but I'm curious, are you grateful for the backlash? Did it affect the way you played the role, the way you prepared for it? Do you think you would have gone about it differently if people had just been thrilled from the jump?
That's a great question. Firstly, I managed to sneak in last night to see Cabaret on Broadway. The production that I was in, which Adam Lambert is now doing, and it is breathtaking. He is so extraordinary, as all the cast are. But you're right. Look, I have a history of parts that I've played that have been problematic in some of those choices, and I've spent a lot of time ruminating on those things and wondering what I would do differently. I was, when it came to Cabaret, I didn't take the part. I'd learnt my lesson, and I didn't take the part on without knowing exactly what I was doing. And the thing with Cabaret is, the musical is based on Isherwood's book, Goodbye to Berlin, which tells the story of the two protagonists, Sally Bowles and Cliff Bradshaw. But the MC doesn't exist. So the part that I played in London and New York was the MC. The MC was a character that was created for the musical by Joel Grey and Hal Prince, and it was to weave the kind of narrative together. But as far as what he exists as on the page, there is no character description for him. No one talks about him. He doesn't exist in the book. And now he has been played iconically by queer actors absolutely brilliantly. And certainly, for example, in the Alan Cumming version, at the end of the piece, the MC, his costume is taken off and he's revealed in a concentration camp outfit with a pink triangle, and which was incredibly moving and was incredibly powerful on Broadway, and I think had sort of made people go, this is a gay character, and so I absolutely understood the questioning of that. But actually my take on it, rather than the MC being the victim, was the MC as perpetrator, and this idea that in my take on the MC, he starts in this world. He's kind of based on some of those characters from, you know, German expressionist movies. He can lull people in, as those cabarets did, and skewer audiences, people who've paid a lot of money to kind of be like slapped in the face a bit, you know, and then gradually over the evening, this kind of puckish figure rises into the kind of Aryan perpetrator. And I think when I was cast, people assumed that I was going to be doing, and because of the work that I'd done previously, that I was taking an iconically queer role. And whilst I absolutely understand that discussion, I also think there is, you know, that character is descriptionless and deserves any form of interpretation. So I found it. I was upset by the backlash, but when it was announced, but I had faith in my own take on the role. And you sort of had to wait for. I suppose what I was saying is, please just wait and see the performance before you make judgment on it.
Given how much you invest, and I mean, I love the way you're reflecting on this. It's really beautiful and really inspiring to hear somebody who just, you know, cares so much, and then has had the opportunity to dig into stuff where you can care that much, and it's just, I mean, it's really lovely to hear. When I read once that you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the internet. Is it true that on the set you described at some point rediscovering a love for, maybe it was film acting, on The Good Nurse through your sort of partnership with Jessica Chastain?
Yeah.
What do you feel you had lost, and maybe what are some of the reasons why, and what were you rediscovering?
I think I was rediscovering a freedom. Honestly, I feel that. And I think it was cabaret and the process of prepping for cabaret and throwing myself into different worlds of going back to, I went to like clowning school in Paris. I went and worked with this brilliant choreographer, Julia Cheng, people who physically, vocally took you to different places that made me realize that what happens with acting is you work hard, you audition for everything you can, you desperately try to make a career. But if you can, you get a job, you do it, you get pigeonholed into different places, depending on.
I know nothing about that. I don't know what you
what that moment is. It's so. I look back on my work, and there was definitely like I had a sort of Elizabethan period, like of any film with Elizabeth.
You've gotten some good pigeonholes.
I guess I don't get me wrong. I'm not complaining about
pigeonholes. But yes,
You've had many pigeonholes, which means there's no pigeonhole at all.
But it got to a point, I think, where I was sitting on. I wasn't necessarily inspired by the process, and then honestly, it was working with Tobias Lindholm and Jess Chastain, a brilliant cinematographer called Jodie Lee Lipes, who did this thing when on the first day on The Good Nurse, I arrived on set and I was in this corridor in a hospital, and the set was virtually pitch black. Like you could see nothing. And then I looked in the camera and it was much lighter, and there was a kind of, Jodie was filming it that way to create this kind of graininess, almost like a film texture. And it was amazing because it meant that you didn't see the crew and you didn't see, so that odd thing that I always find with filming, that the first kind of mental leap that you have to take is you're having an intimate chat and there are, 20 people standing here. Yeah. It was our brilliant crew became kind of recessive or disappeared. And I remember years ago doing a pilot for an HBO thing with which Barry Ackroyd shot, and Barry shoots on these long lenses from miles away. And it was the most wonderful experience imaginable, because we could be shooting this scene without the feeling of being scrutinized. And I don't know how you find, but every time.
I mean, my show is, Nava's seen it. It's the cameras are. I'm often acting with an X on the mat box.
That was fantastic piece for me.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a different skill, isn't it?
Completely different skill.
It's a kind of, and innately more technical, and it's bloody hard.
Yes. In my current role, I feel like I have become such a technical actor.
Yeah.
That I'm like constantly thinking about lighting. I mean, I directed an episode, so it sort of ended up paying off in that sense. But it's that what you're describing right there sounds really lovely.
So Penn, talk to me about the directing.
Oh, they don't want to hear this.
No, I do actually. Please, but I do want to hear
no.
about how did you find that first moment when you? Because I've thought about that world, but like having.
Would you direct you'd probably direct a film, right?
No, I mean,
would you direct something that you would act in?
I don't. I don't know. That's my question. Is how did you? What was that first moment like?
I mean,
and would you do it again?
for the sake of brevity, I would love to give you as an in-depth answer as you want. But for the sake of our podcast and time, I will try to give you something clothed in the garment of brevity. Let me pause for a while. Now, it's so because the role is so technical, because the show is called You, and I'm at the center of it. Everything is from my perspective. My voiceover is like 90% of the spoken words. I am often acting with X's on a matte box because the camera has to be right here because the whole thing is glued together by like my face and thoughts happening. It is already like a producerial, editorial, technical. I work more with the camera crew than I work with other actors. Brilliant. Like literally.
Yeah.
I have a different crew and cast every season. Like it is a role that is so uncommonly central to the apparatus that directing was like, oh no, this is actually kind of like I almost would rather do this if and what I did not get was time to prep.
Yeah.
Adequate time to prep. I couldn't watch playback. So it was like I was doing everything very intuitively.
Yeah.
Never do it again like that. Okay. However, it was very interesting. And I was in London, by the way. I love London.
Wait, but also time to prep, but also presumably time to edit, because this is what I don't understand on these shows. It's so, my show I found so relentless.
Yes,
the time.
yeah. Television, even when you're doing it at the prestige level, time is so hard to come by. You're just doing so much in so little time. I was editing on LA time in London, so I'd come home from a full day and then edit over Zoom. But then, in television, this is the thing: you're not the same. You're shepherding something as opposed to generating it the way you are in film. As a director in television, you have an easier job. It's a little more utilitarian. So I you get to leave your stamp. You get to have certain moments where it's like this is the essence of what we do, and that's awesome. And then a lot of it is kind of facilitating things that the crew already knows how to shoot the show.
Yeah, I'd love to have a proper chat with you about the difference between the American system and the British system. I think there are quite a few.
There are some significant differences. We had trouble doing our show in London. We were like a month over in the end.
Wow.
Yeah. For a lot of reasons. For reasons that are.
Where were you staying?
Ladbroke Grove, mostly.
Where I live.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love it, dude. I apart from being away from my family for so long, I loved it there. I loved it.
It's a great city, I've got to say. I've been away. I was in Hungary doing Dare the Jackal for 8 months, and then I had 4 days off and came to New York, where I've been for. So I've just got home. He says from New York, but I just got back to London, and it's a beautiful place. I sort of forget how wonderful it is.
You mentioned the differences between American film and British film, and I'm curious. My mom is English, my dad is American, and so I know it goes without saying that there's such cultural differences between the two places just generally. And I'm curious for you, growing up in England and then also being in Hollywood, what are the cultural differences that you had to get used to?
I don't know if they're cultural differences or they're my things, but I think there's an odd thing with the sort of the English politeness, that manifests itself in actually we don't quite say what we mean, and then we repress it and bitch behind your back that we haven't said what we wanted to say, and why can't you read what I'm saying? By the subtext with which I said it, rather than in America, everyone says it sort of up front. But then
I even noticed when you said the first two questions, you at least told us that you proposed to your wife, but you said you don't want to go to the theater, do you? And then you said you don't want to go to Florence, do you? Like that, as opposed to saying, do you want to? You're like, nah, you don't want to.
I mean, how much do you pay for therapy? Like, you can be my therapist. But it's also what's weird, honestly, as a British actor, though, is you go, fuck you then read when you start coming over and you do press and people are like, oh, it's English, he's so sort of charming. And you go like, oh shit, like, is that part of your shtick? You know,
It's the only reason you've made it.
Seriously, genuinely, don't get me there. Like, there are moments
so
when
alluring.
you go, but I am trying as I get older to sort of get rid of it, because there's a difference between politeness and being disingenuous and actually.
You don't strike me as, well, I don't necessarily. So my wife is British, but she moved here when she was 12.
Right.
So she has a very like she has a very un-British like sincerity and earnestness, and like she's so open and warm in that way, in a way that's like, I actually kind of thought she was like South American when I first met her. I didn't know what that was. And then after having spent some time there, I definitely have more of a sense of what you're saying. But you know, I have to say, this self-consciousness that you just mentioned. I mean, you didn't use that word, but like, what strikes me is that you, in your early 20s, you know, coming out of like boarding school and the experiences you had there, I did really want to hear about your thesis with this color blue, and like that was. We can't get into that. Your lack of self-consciousness, that you, at least between those moments of action and cut, because I understand that who you are between action and cut is not this person you necessarily ever get to be anywhere else. You know, there's something very special about those moments. And the best thing we can do as actors is just strip away all that we've prepared and thought of. Say, no, I prep just exhaustively. So I'm really with you there too. We have just so many similarities, it's uncanny. But that lack of self-consciousness, like seeing you, say, in The Good Shepherd, you know, how old were you there? 24?
24, yeah.
24?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you're standing alongside some of our most iconic American actors, and that's its own just, I mean, you're like on a film set, those differences.
Yeah.
You have this like beautiful lack of self-consciousness, which it just, I think that's what, you know, all the other things make you great, but that to me is like, without that you can't be present, and you can't do what we do, and I just want to commend you on, like, you know, whatever the wild insecurities you must have, which everybody has, between action and cut, you at least know how to like strip it away.
Thank you, buddy. It means a lot, because I think of, you know, adolescence. Like, for me, the moment of adolescence was the moment of a switch going off into self-consciousness.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I hate it. Yeah. And I can, like, why I brought up that sort of piano thing was I just, like, I remember there being a period where you didn't think about making friends. I remember that being a thing when I arrived at age 13 at school, and suddenly having to think about conversation. Right. Until then, everything was on instinct, and my kids are 6 and 8, and it's so glorious to see that, and I don't know what that is that chafes away at it, but there are definitely moments, those moments on screen, like the reason I love acting and like there's an addiction to it is for those millisecond moments, I think, that happen maybe once every 3 years, in which there is a moment of complete freedom, of total lack of self-consciousness, and that's the drug. Like that for me is the thing that brings you back and back. But I love that you think I've conned you into thinking that I'm not self-conscious for a lot.
Well, no. I mean, I know that you are. I just think that you have a utility of stripping it away enough so that I think that's what makes great actors great. I think it could be as simple as that. It's that self-consciousness between action and cut. So you were bringing it back to that time of adolescence, which love it, so thematic. That's when it switches on. So if you could go back to 12-year-old Eddie, what would you say or do, if anything? And this is our last question.
Yeah, I think, you know, I've talked about not caring what people think, you know, when I was at school, and I think I think that's true to an extent, in that I've put up some pretty hard barriers to go, I don't care, you can throw the mockery at me, you know, I don't give a shit. But I actually think that is when the strictures started coming out. And I think it was probably exacerbated by being at an English all-boys boarding school. Yeah. I kind of wish that I had that art of not giving a fuck had really been more potent then, and because I'll not forget when I was prepping for cabaret. I went and spent a day moving with this choreographer, Julia Cheng. You know, I really can't dance, and she is this extraordinary dancer who specializes in street dance and whacking and voguing. And I was like terrified to go into this room with her because I was, what the hell? And she just brought movement out of me in a way in which, if anyone had watched, it would have been the most humiliating thing in the world. But I felt free, and I hadn't felt that feeling since before adolescence, before that moment of, and I think that freedom is something that we can all aspire to in some ways. But that's probably what I would say. I have no idea what it was that I would say, but it's quite loquacious and weird.
Eddie, I just want to say, I think you're physically the furthest away a guest has ever been. And at the risk of embarrassing you, I do want to say that the whole interview, I've had this, been flooded with this feeling of feeling so lucky to be in your presence because you just seem like an extraordinary person. So even though you're physically far away, I can feel that. So
thank you
feel
so
really
much.
Honored.
It's been a real treat for me. And I'm sorry not to meet you guys in person. I'm very jealous you're in Florence. Say hi to the Arno for me. Go and sit on go in Santa Spirito and have a peach daiquiri.
Oh, you okay? I know you've been here because that is the best square. That's the best piazza.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so nice to meet you.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you so much, mate. Thank you, guys.
You can watch The Day of the Jackal on Peacock, and you can keep up with him online. No, you can't. He's off socials, but go watch Day of the Jackal.
We are so excited that you can now listen to Podcrushed ad-free on Amazon Music. In fact, you can listen to any episode of Podcrushed ad-free right now on Amazon Music with an Amazon Prime membership.
React to an intro. I always find
How do
it
you
quite
do
cringy.
an intro?
No, yes.
I have to see. I don't like doing it live because
you know what it feels like.
Yes, and I hate when people list my Oscar nominations as well. That's I know that's the problem you have. It's the one I get too. Also my BAFTAs, also my Olivier's, also my Tonys. It's infuriating. It's humiliating. Can we just please focus on the work?